What's shaking, my friends? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about self-published fantasy books. Today is Wednesday the 17th and SPFBO 9 launched today, as in the authors were able to submit their books for the 9th year of the competition. If you don't know what SPFBO is, it is a self-published fantasy blog-off competition held by Mark Lawrence, where a lot of different YouTubers and bloggers are able to judge these self-published fantasy and whittle it down to a winner. This went live today, and last year the submissions, the 300 submissions, were all filled up within 9 hours. This year, the submissions were filled up within 41 minutes. So let's think about that for just a minute, because I'm excited for this big push towards self-published fantasy. I think previous years, there has been this bias that if you're self-published, it means that you're not good enough to be published, which that is a completely different conversation, but it is very exciting that we see this push forward with self-published fantasy and so many more self-published fantasy authors. One of my goals this year was to read more self-published fantasy, and have I accomplished that? The answer is no. But overall, my reading year has been less than it ever has been before. So I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about those self-published books I have read and what's on my list for next reads. What is my top self-published TBR? This TBR portion could change at any minute. I am always looking for new books to read. I am always looking for recommendations. So if you have any, leave them down in the comments below. I am interested to know. I do have Kindle Unlimited, so I do have access to most of these books via that route. I will say that a lot of times my self-published books don't get read as much because I don't have the audiobook, and a lot of self-published authors don't have an audiobook, and that's simply because it is expensive to produce one. So, but just because you don't have an audiobook doesn't mean that you should not get your book out there. So let's start off by talking about which self-published fantasy I've read in the past couple of years. I have read a lot more self-published romance, as well as I've read some horror as well. But for these purposes, we are going to talk about the self-published fantasy that I have read. So I have read Gods of Men by Barbara Kloss. Now, this trilogy that she wrote won SPFBO, one of the years. I can't remember, a few years ago. And I really enjoyed this. This fantasy basically plays with some song magic. I do think that it leans a little bit younger. So it is an adult fantasy, but it does lean a little bit younger as far as having tropes and that kind of thing. I really enjoyed book 1. Book 2 and book 3 kind of went downhill for me, but overall I gave the whole series a 3-star read. I think the magic system was very unique in the fact that, you know, we have this music in the world, and our main character has actually, when she's a little girl, she has killed somebody with her playing her flute, and she didn't realize that she had this magic, and so she killed her sister, and she is forced to flee the world because of course magic is not allowed to exist anymore. So she has to flee from her country and kind of go into hiding, and then somebody figures out that she has been into hiding, and that's where the story kind of takes us. And I would highly recommend this, especially for some YA readers looking to get into some more adult fantasy. The next trilogy to talk about that I read last year was the series by Zach Argyle that starts with The Voice of War. The Red Light is the series name, and I overall enjoyed the entire series. I gave every single book of these 4 stars. I think the narrator for these books was absolutely superb. Would highly recommend these books. I really enjoyed the characters of this world. It kind of has a chosen one trope to it, but these are very short, quick reads, and I think that, you know, with a great narrator for the audiobooks, this is 100% a great paced read, and I overall enjoyed the entire trilogy. The next books that I have read is the Chordia Sagas, which starts out with Blood of Heirs by Alicia Wanstall Burke. I read all 3 of these last year as well, And this one, I think, also won SPFBO or came high up in the competition one year. I'm not sure. But this one I really enjoyed all the way through. I gave the first 2 books 4 stars and the last book 3 stars just because the trilogy ended up not how I necessarily wanted it to end up. But I think the twists and turns of this world was very fantastic, and it basically follows, it's called Blood of Heirs, and it's basically following these 2 heirs to their kingdoms that have their own issues. And you know, one of our main characters is a female, and she doesn't want to do what females want to do. She's pushing boundaries. She wants to be a man. She wants to be in the military. And then our other one, we figure out something about him where he has to flee, and so people are hunting him down. So this series I enjoyed. It was action-packed. I liked it. I bought the entire trilogy once I was done with it, and I would highly recommend these books. I recently read Along the Razor's Edge by Rob DeHaze, and while this was not my favorite, I did vlog this book recently. I gave it 3 stars. I do understand, and I do want to continue on. I understand why people love it. But for me, it didn't work just because of the isolated setting, as we're following our main character, Eska, and she is trying to break out of prison. She has been thrown into prison, and she is just trying to break out, and there's some magic, and her magic's been taken away from her. So I enjoyed it, and I am looking forward to continue on with that series this year. I also tried to read the Cradle series last year by Will White. This is a very popular series. This is known as progression fantasy. So I had never heard of progression fantasy before, but this is basically where we're leveling up our character per se. And I read the first 2 Cradle books, and I gave it 3 stars, and then I went ahead and DNF'd the 3rd one because I just wasn't pulled in to the world as much, and I figured out, this is what I figured out about myself, that progression fantasy is not for me. And maybe it can be done in a different way that may be my taste, but the first 2 books of Cradle just did not pull me in enough, and the 3rd was kind of starting out the exact same way as those, and I just did not jive with those books. But that is probably the most popular self-published fantasy series ever. So highly, if you are interested in self-published, check it out. I also read last year Kings of Paradise by Richard Nell, which I enjoyed. It had a very interesting characterization. I ended up giving it 3 stars just because I wasn't fully immersed. It's a very long book, and I thought a lot of it sometimes meandered, but I enjoyed this world. And this is a very popular fantasy series as well, self-published fantasy series, and I would highly recommend it. It has some grim, dark characters in this grim, hopeless world, so if you like that, then you may like this, because one of the characters, as it starts out as the opening of the book, is like he's eating the cheeks off a little child. So if, of course, trigger warnings, look them up, but I overall felt that Richard Nell did his characters very well in that story. I also last year tried to read The Crimson Queen by Alec Hudson, and I ended up DNFing it, and this was not the book's fault at all. This was my fault because I just wasn't in the headspace to read it, and there was some traveling going on in there, and I wasn't in the headspace to read traveling. I have to be in that kind of mood, but I may go back to this one at some point in time and retry it. Last year I also read A Touch of Light by Chiago Abdallah, and this one I also gave 3 stars. This has a magic system, and it kind of deals with a lot of religion, and the only reason that it kind of uses this mechanism where you are thrown into the story and you don't get any explanation of what's happening, and you have to figure it out yourself. I loved his characters. I just sometimes got confused on the world itself, and that's why it kind of made me not give it more than 3 stars, but I may or may not continue on in that series. I am not sure, but plenty of people love that series, so I implore you to go check it out if it sounds interesting to you. The last self-published book that I read just last month was Thrice by Andrew D. Meredith, and I enjoyed this one so great. This is about a man who is asked to look after this boy. The boy has magic, and he doesn't realize that there are maybe some bad people coming after them, so they have to flee and people are following them. It is a great look at relationships of every kind, and I thoroughly enjoyed that book. Plus, it's pretty short, and the second book just came out, so I am looking forward to continuing on that series. Now let's talk about some self-published fantasy that is on the top of my TBR. So I will go ahead and let you know that I can be persuaded. So if you are a self-published fantasy author and you want to pitch your book to me, leave it down in the comments below. Maybe I will read something in your synopsis and something about the way that you pitch your book that will drive that up to the top of my TBR. But let me go ahead and just let you know a few of these books. I'm not going to talk about necessarily what each one of them are about, and these are probably some of the most popular self-published fantasy out there, but we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. The first one, of course, is going to be The Sword of Karakan by M.L. Wong, which I did back the Kickstarter, so I am looking forward to getting that book later in the year and looking forward to diving in. I hear it is great mom characters, and it's a very emotional story that may make me cry. So that is what I like to hear. The next one is the series that starts with Never Die by Rob J. Hayes. I read Along the Razor's Edge, and now I want to try something different from Rob J. Hayes. He writes a lot of different series, and I've heard this one is very kung fu-y, if that makes any sense. But I've heard a lot of great things about it. Looking forward to checking it out. The Iron Crown by L.L. McCrae. I do sometimes see what this author does, and or I'm reading her replies on things, and I am looking forward to reading this book. I've heard a lot of people chatting about this book and her other series, which also is on my radar, that starts with Maroda, but I am looking forward to the second book. Just came out, so I will have more books to read if I wish to start that series. And of course, we have The Legend of Blackjack, written by A.R. Witham. If you don't know who A.R. Witham is, you are missing out. Join the Keymark Discord. He is lots of fun, lots of amusement coming from his end, and I am looking forward to reading his middle grade story. The 13th Hour by Trudy Skies, which was one of the finalists in SPFBO last year, and something about it pulls me in. The cover pulled me in, the way that a lot of people talk about the book pulled me in, and maybe, just maybe, I will enjoy it. The second book is now out, and so more for us to read. I have two series on here by Andrew Rowe. The first one starts with 6 Sacred Swords, and then the second one starts with Sufficiently Advanced Magic. I have heard nothing but great things about Andrew Rowe, and let me just tell you something. His covers are stunning. I always feel like he has like the #1 covers. I don't know whether it's the colors that pop or whatever, but they're always drawing my eyeballs in to want to read those. The Soul's Aspect by Mark Holloway, which also was in the SPFBO competition last year, and this is, I think, is a short book. The second book is out. I know I've heard a lot of people just say great things about this, so it popped it up on my TBR. And of course, I cannot mention self-published fantasy without speaking about Ryan Cahill, and that is going to be A Blood and Fire. And listen, I want to read this series, the Bound and the Broken series. These books are massive, they are chunky, but that's okay because I want to read it. And when I'm going to get around to them, I don't know, but there's something about these dragons. I'm in my dragon era, so I don't know, but I want to read it. Another dragon book, Ascendant by Michael R. Miller. I've heard a lot about this book going around recently. I think it's more YA or middle grade, and I am looking forward to, I think the dragons just kind of like excite me. I don't know why. Why are we excited about dragons? I don't know, but interested to look into that one. Another dragon book that, of course, is going to be Dragon Mage by Emil Spencer. One that we have heard a lot about and some of y'all have read. And there's going to be a sequel to this. Originally, there wasn't going to be, but the author wrote another book in this universe. So we'll have to see how that kind of goes. But I'm looking forward to reading Dragon Mage for sure. Into the Labyrinth by John Bierce. First of all, you're talking about a labyrinth, and I'm in. You've hooked me with everything that you can say. I think this is called the Mage Errant series. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I am in it from the synopsis. Legacy of the Bright Wash by Crystal Matar. This book I've heard nothing but fantastic things about. I haven't heard a single negative review on this book. The second book just came out. These are chunkers. These are big boys. But I feel like I want to read it. And I think maybe the audiobook to the first one just came out. I'm not quite sure. But it has cemented itself into my top self-published TBR. And Blackstone Heart by Michael R. Fletcher. I have never read a true grimdark all the way through novel, which is interesting because I just read a tweet from Michael R. Fletcher who says, like, his unpopular opinion is he doesn't think he's ever written a grimdark novel. But everybody I know that has read this has said it's very, very grimdark. Some people have DNF'd it because of how grimdark it is. I'm interested to try it to see where I fall. The Mortal Blade by Christopher Mitchell. I think this was in a SPFBO competition one year, maybe won or came in one of the top spots. So I am interested, and this is a series and there's a lot of books out in it. So interested to start that one. And then we have Phased by Victoria Tekken, who is a fellow booktuber under the channel Tori Talks. So I love Tori. I was on her team for the TBR Blitz this past month, and I really am looking forward to reading her YA werewolf novel. And then, of course, we have The Way of Edan by Dr. Philip Chase, which I'm looking forward to reading. I kind of want to wait. I think all the rest of the books are coming out this year, so I kind of want to wait till closer to the rest of them release. But I do have this lovely copy, and at some point I'll be getting to The Way of Edan. Okay, so those are the books that are on the tippy top of my self-published TBR. Do you want to read any self-published? Again, pitch me any books you love down in the description below. I am new to this kind of self-published game. I'm just watching other booktubers or reviewers to kind of see what they are liking. And this, of course, is just my fantasy TBR, not my sci-fi. That's a whole nother thing. That's a whole different competition. There is one for sci-fi as well, but this is just what I want to read in fantasy, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Basically, there's too many books and so little time, but I am open to reading more self-published works. I'm so excited about SPFBO 9, and some of these books on my TBR are in SPFBO 9, and that is going to be Phased by Victoria Tekken and going to be The Legend of Blackjack by A.R. Witham. And so I want to get those two read for sure sometime soon, and I want to read some other ones in the competition. And maybe when it gets whittled down, I will actually read all of the finalists and kind of make my own predictions. But we'll have to see. If you like a self-published fantasy, if it's one of your favorite novels, leave it down below. Pitch it to me. If you're an author, pitch it to me. I want to read more self-published works. Alright guys, I will catch you guys later.